So, welcome to another show. Today, we're going to discuss fallacies. Essentially, what fallacies are ways that people try and argue, and actually, they are deceptive or false arguments that people may use to make their argument seem stronger than it is. And it is based on like changing the argument to an extent or making the argument based on no real fundamental value. Um, so although that might sound a bit strange, when you come to hear about what these fallacies are, it should make more sense essentially. So the first one is called ad-hominem. So this is where you're in an argument, and instead of actually arguing against the situation itself, you instead attack the person rather than attack the argument. So, for example, you might say, well, you shouldn't listen to Paul's opinion on inflation because he's not an economist. Or you shouldn't listen to John with that business decision because what does he know? He went broke, or you went broke if it's talking to you. So what you can see there is actually the argument is then not against what you're arguing about, it's against the person. And you can probably think of times this happens in your life. The second one is, or the next one rather, is appealing to authority. So this is when you're trying to back up an argument based on some sort of authority that you've heard it from. So you might say, the government said that, our country's doing well, so it must be. Or my dad told me this, so it must be true. Or my teacher told me this. Or, my CEO said this. You can see that actually all you're trying to establish then is not what has been said, but who has said it and their value and their level of authority, essentially. Now, just before we move on to the next one, you can start to see actually what a fallacy is, can't you? That it's about actually trying to back up your argument with incredulous or invalid argument or ways to back up your argument. So the next one is what's called a strawman fallacy. One of my favorites actually is where you misrepresent an argument or exaggerate someone else's argument to make it easier to sort of refute, if you like. So you might say, for example, you might say your argument is actually we should let people decide if they want to be religious, let's say. And someone might say, so you're saying that we should let everyone just be hedonistic and murder everyone. So what they've done is they've actually just changed the argument. Because then instead of arguing about whether people should be allowed to decide religion, they've just made the argument into hedonism and murdering everyone. You can see that actually what they've done is changed the argument. I remember I said to someone recently, I said, yeah, I think people or kids should learn about Santa, or learn that Santa's not real at an earlier age than they do. And he said, what? So you're saying they should go and get a job working in the mines at that age? And I said, well, actually, that's straw man, isn't it? Because that's not what I said. Basically, you've just changed the argument and got your own and brought your own connotations to it. So the next one is called the false cause, aka, and actually prefer this, the correlation causation fallacy. So it's saying that just because something correlates, it does not mean it's caused. So, for example, does listening to rap music cause more violence, or is there just a correlation between people who listen to it and violence ensuing? Or it might be that you change the color of your logo and it led to fewer views or more views, which means that caused or didn't. In fact, it was just a correlation. So you see this a lot, don't you? So you need to establish, is it a cause or is it just a correlation? And then you can determine what course of action to use from there. The next one is the slippery slope. So this is where people take things to the nth degree. So they might say, well, if we allow people to drive faster, we'll have no one living because all the babies will be killed in accidents. So it's just jumping from A to Z very, very quickly, isn't it? Without really any thought as to whether that's going to be true. And if we let students retake exams, the entire education system will collapse. You can see that actually that's not what would necessarily happen. They're jumping to the nth degree and really exaggerating what the outcome could be to refute your argument. Next one is the appeal to emotion. So this is where you try and manipulate emotions to get people to do something. So appeal to emotion, for example, oh, shop with us, or let me take control because I fund starving kids in Africa. So you can see that that's appealing to your emotion of those starving kids in Africa, which may affect your decision as to whether or not to either shop somewhere or to back someone. Next one is the false dilemma. This is where you're given two options. Well, either you agree with us or you don't, or either you're with us or you're against us. But that's not necessarily the case. You don't either agree that we should, run this business idea or disagree. Maybe you think there's another way. So that's giving you two it's a false dilemma, as it says. That's not really the options. It's not black and white. It's not one end of the spectrum or the other. Actually, could there be something in the middle? Next one is the hasty generalization. This is, we've heard this before. Are you being very, very hasty? Because you're drawing a conclusion based on insufficient or biased evidence. So, for example, you might say, "I've had, a bad relationship. So all blonde girls are awful people, and you should never get married to one." Because you're generalizing that one blonde woman you went out with to every single blonde woman. And you could do this with race, religion. You could do this with anything. A football team, every single Leeds fan is terrible, whatever it may be. That's a hasty generalization. And to be fair, this is one that people do use with race, religion, creeds a lot, and it's not necessarily true. Next one is the burden of proof, aka appeal to ignorance. So this is where it's saying that because you haven't found evidence that something doesn't exist, it must exist. So because it's not been proven false, it's got to be true. For example, there is no evidence that Area 51 doesn't have alien documents, so they must do. If you can't disprove that, it must. If you can't disprove that 9/11 was an inside job, it must be right. It must be right. It has to be. So you see this a lot with so-called conspiracy theorists. Yeah. So next one is the red herring. So this is where, and again, you would have heard of the word red herring or phrase before. This is where you're just introducing something irrelevant as a red herring. So you might be watching your football team, for example, and you might say, well, we're not played very well today. Someone may say, well, we shouldn't worry about the performance on the pitch because the club's in urgent financial ruin. So, okay, and people do say things like that, but that's not the point. The argument is, was the performance good enough? And that's what you should be arguing about, not about the club on the whole and the financial concerns. And look, we can understand that, but this is again what fallacies mean. It's are you arguing the right point or not? Next one is the bandwagon fallacy. So this is where you're jumping on, again, you've heard this phrase before, jumping on the bandwagon. So this is a lot of the time where brands do well. If everyone wears night trainers, night trainers must be the best. If everyone uses this toothpaste, it must be the best. If everyone shops at this shop, it must be the best. It might be that the majority of advertisers say that you should spend money on Facebook ads, so therefore Facebook ads are the best form of advertisement, which may not be the case. You might want to advertise on Amazon if you've got a book or a product on there, or if you're a local pub, you might want to advertise on a billboard or in local newspaper or local magazine. So yeah, that's the bandwagon fallacy. Next one is the anecdotal evidence. So this is where you use someone's personal experience to extrapolate to everything. So you might say, well, actually, one of our sales guys doubled their sales after changing their aftershave. Therefore, we all need to change our aftershave to double our conversions. That's because, that might be a one-off. He might have smelled beforehand, and now he wears aftershave. It's changed for him, but it doesn't necessarily mean to say that it's going to happen for everyone. And that was just your personal experience. And that's what's called anecdotal evidence. Next one is the Texan Sharpshooter, or Texan Sharpshooter. This is another one of my favorites. Imagine a guy who shoots at a wall and then draws around targets around the holes of where the bullets were left. He's basically saying, look, I've hit the target every time. You get these people with, for example, say betting. They've bet on 10 football games individually, and you hear about the one that they won, and they're like, oh, I'm a genius. Yeah, but you didn't tell us about all of the scores that you got wrong. Then you see this when people try and predict the future, or say, what's going to happen with the economy. They make 10 different claims, and when they get one right, that's a Texan Sharpshooter fallacy, because they are just looking at drawing around that, and they've made loads of shots, and actually they've drawn around and said they've hit the mark. Next one is the middle ground fallacy. This assumes that a compromise between two extreme conflicting points is always true. So instead of, for example, Derek thinks that we should change the entire brochure, but Melissa doesn't think we should make any changes. Therefore, the best approach is to redesign part of it. So just the cover, for example. So it's a little bit different to one of the fallacies we looked at earlier, where it's two extremes, and you're saying we should go down the middle. This one is saying, well, the middle's always right. Again, that's not true. That's not correct. That's folly. The next one is the personal incredulity fallacy. So if you don't understand why something is true, it doesn't mean that it's false. And again, this happens a lot with people. So you might not understand why changing just the business name resulted in more conversions. So there must have been something else at play. That's the personal incredulity fallacy. The next one is a no true Scotsman. Again, this is quite a common one. So I'll just use an example straight away with this one, because I think it illustrates the point best. So Eric might say, no chef would ever eat a steak over medium level. Yasmin might say, but everyone else and chefs in general should eat medium. So you can't be a true chef. You can't be a true chef. Everyone I know eats medium or less, medium rare. No true chef will never do that. So he's not a real chef. He's not a true Scotsman. You see this all the time. You can't be a true football fan if you think X. You can't be a true Ronaldo fan if you think Messi's good. Or you can't be a true Messi fan if you think Ronaldo's good. You can't be a true X, Y, and Z. So that's a no true Scotsman fallacy. And this is where you're trying to basically say you can't fit that description because you would have a different view than what you've illustrated. The next one is a tukaku fallacy, if that's even how you pronounce it, by the way. And it's Latin for you also. And you basically discredit an opponent by answering criticism with criticism. So Craig may say, I don't think John would be a good fit to lead this because he doesn't have a lot of experience with leading this hike. John might say, but you don't have any experience either. And this is where, it's a bit like attacking the person, as we said earlier, with ad hominem, but it's where you're basically, you've been dealt in some respects. You've been told, well, you've not got any experience, you're not very good, but you're not very good either. It's just basically going back to the person and saying they aren't fit to do whatever it is either. And finally, a fallacy. So this is just basically saying, actually, look, if you think about the fallacies we've looked at today, and you're probably going to listen back to it or think about some of the times that you've incorporated or experienced them. But just because a fallacy exists, whether it's someone strawmanning, someone doing ad hominem, whatever it's going to be, it doesn't mean that their argument is wrong. The argument might be crap, it might suck, but it doesn't actually validate the premise, but it doesn't mean they are wrong. They might actually still be right, but they are using the wrong ways to illustrate that. So they're the fallacies. Try and think about ways that you incorporated them or heard of them in your own life, and actually think of ways that when you are arguing, people use them and try and refute them. I mean, since I've learned about these, I've actually started calling people out, say, well, you're this straw man, you're arguing a different point now. Let's get back to the actual argument. So yeah, have fun with that, and thanks for listening.